All right. Well, thank you for coming out this afternoon. I know it's been a long, full day, so we appreciate everyone here. I'm Julie Kohlauer, and I'm with a social marketing and PR firm called C+C, and I'll be the first speaker today. And do you guys want to quickly introduce yourselves?
Oh, sure. I'm Loud. I'm Jason Hale with the Recycling Partnership. I've actually worked with both these guys quite a bit, and I'll be your second speaker today. And we have Bob Gettert.
I'm Bob Gettert. I'm with RRS, and I'll be your third speaker.
Excellent. So in the audience today, we've got such a small group. Just to get a sense, I'd love to hear, who in this audience is working with sort of residential consumer type audiences versus business audiences. So let's start with residential in terms of, well, there's a few. How about business audiences? So a little bit more on the business side. Okay, great. Let's run through this. If you have a burning question as we are talking, is this okay with you guys too to have them chime in as we go? We'll leave a few minutes at the end for questions, but I think with this size of group, if we say something that doesn't make sense or you have a question, just raise your hand and we can address it real time as we go and go through this. So thank you all for being here. Let's see if I can make my clicker work. There we go. All right, so what I'm going to talk about today are the best ways to really change consumer behaviors at the curb. So my particular presentation is focused a little bit more on that consumer and getting them to do what we need to do to recycle right at the curb. And everyone in this industry probably knows we've kind of created a mess for the consumer, right? We have changed the rules. We have changed what can go in the bin. The packaging looks different. The complexity of what they can and can't do has really, really gone up. And as a result, what we have is a really confused consumer, rightfully so, and commingled carts that have a lot of contamination in them, right? Which is causing huge impacts on the industry of everyone who has to try to sort that out at our MRFs and figure out what to do with those materials. So we've got this confused public, and the question is, what do we need to do about that? So today, my presentation, what I'm going to go through is the 4 key points of planning a consumer education campaign. So what do you want to think about if you're trying to fix this problem and basically clean up your recycling stream? And so the structure of this will be going through these 4 items. So the first thing is to identify the problem. So what do we know about consumer behavior change? There's been a lot of research and a lot of psychology and behavior science research done around what does it take to get someone to change their behavior. And probably the biggest part of the science that is different than what we thought 20 years ago is that awareness and education alone has no scientific correlation to someone actually changing their behavior, right? So just because you know something is a problem or know that you should be doing something doesn't mean you will actually act on that behavior. So because of that, it's really, really important to figure out what are the triggers that are going to cause someone to actually change their behaviors. We also know that in recycling and a lot of environmental issues, we have this issue of self-reporting bias. So what do you think someone says when you ask them if they recycle? Anybody? Yes, and they say they do it 100% accurately all the time. But guess what? Like 50% of what's in the garbage cans is probably still recyclable or more. So you've got this dichotomy where people think they do a good job or think they need to say they do a good job, but that doesn't actually match their true behaviors. What we do know is that people do change their behaviors when there's a personal benefit to them that overcomes any barrier they face to the behavior. So you say, well, that might sound obvious, but there's so many education campaigns where we don't get into what's stopping them from the behavior, what can we give them to cause them to do the behavior. So when we're looking at changing citizen behaviors, we have a continuum. And these percentages here are different depending on the behavior, but you have what we call the show me group. So if you're in the show me group, you're gonna do it because it's the right thing to do. You're that, that's that motivated recycler, the one that's in your business or at your home, that they're just out there and they're doing a great job. In the middle, we have the help me group. And the help me group are the people that need that extra information and need that extra push and motivation to actually change their behavior. And then the last group is what we call the make me group. And the make me group, they aren't going to change their behavior unless they're forced to. So there's a regulation or somebody that causes them to do it. So most of the time we are working in the middle in this help me group and trying to get them over the hump. The other thing we know, and I don't know if you guys can actually read the words on here, but there's a continuum that people go through when they make a behavior change. And it starts with being aware of the issue, having a level of understanding about it, having it become relevant to themselves or yourself, so becoming personally relevant. Then they have to try the behavior, which on this chart is called differentiation. Once they try the behavior, they really better be satisfied with it because it's like 10 times harder if they have a bad experience, to get them to try it again. And once they're satisfied, you can turn them into a loyal person who educates to others, and you have your behavior change wheel going. The point I want to make on this slide is that most recycling programs work in awareness and understanding. They assume if you just tell everybody everything, that they're going to do it and follow through, and that's not true. Where recycling programs need to be working is in making it relevant to people and spurring that behavior change by overcoming barriers. All right, and I mentioned this a little bit ago, but it's really important to not assume you know what the problem is. You need to do research and you need to figure out what's going on. So if you have a recycling program and you're trying to figure out what your problem is, it's probably not the best thing to ask people what they're doing, because we know that they're not going to be completely honest about it with self-reported bias. Instead, what you want to do is look in the bins, what's actually happening in the bins. Go into the homes and actually interview people about how things ended up in certain spots, and really dig deep into what behaviors are causing the issue. And that way you can have an informed behavior change campaign. All right. So number 2 is to find and overcome barriers. So I've mentioned this several times, but this is really the crux of social marketing. Figure out what your barrier is that's stopping people from doing what you want them to do, and find a motivator that's strong enough to overcome that barrier, and that will push people to the behavior change. And this little chart there sort of illustrates that in an extremely simple way. A quick example of this is a program that Waste Management did in the Northwest for food cycling. And what they found out, waste recycling is available to residents, but a lot of people just weren't participating, and they didn't know why. And they'd be doing lots of awareness. Let's send them another direct mail piece that tells them they need to start recycling their food scraps, etc. Well, that's not what was stopping people. What was stopping people is they were paralyzed by the lack of how to do it. They didn't have a system. They needed to figure out how to set it up, and just telling them to do it wasn't good enough. So instead, what Waste Management did is offered incentives of a food waste kitchen top container that they could use to recycle their food scraps. So by giving that incentive to folks, we were able to get much greater participation in the food scrap recycling program. Seems simple, but it's definitely overcoming a barrier. There was a lot more value from providing that incentive than there was from just general education of sending direct mail, et cetera. All right, so golden rule number 3 is focus on what matters. So when you look at your standard recycling guide, right, or the little flyer that you send out, we probably tell people to do 100 things, maybe, right? There's probably 100 rules on there. How many of those rules do you think people actually, understand? They really don't. It's just too much. We're throwing too much information at them. So what you need to figure out is what do you really try to solve? How do you boil it down to the simplest and go after what's most important? Don't try to go after everything, because if you try to go after everything, people will do nothing. So it's really important to get very specific about what behaviors you're trying to target, and in this case with contamination. All right, and then golden rule number 4 is to use the right tools. So in the world of social marketing, if you remember back to that wheel that I showed you, if you're working in awareness and understanding and trying to get that established before you do behavior change, then things like direct mail, ads, billboards, that kind of stuff work great, right? But if you're actually trying to push someone into a behavior change, the closer you can get to one-on-one contact with that person, the more effective you're going to be. Right? So whether that's events, whether that's door knocking, whether that's education at the curb on the carts, those types of interventions are much more effective and have proven in recycling to actually be more cost effective as well in terms of changing behaviors than doing your mass media types of interventions. So pick your tools that are appropriate and get as close to one-on-one interventions and behaviors as you can. So with any recycling program, there are some basics you need to do, right? So you have to have the basics covered. You have to have your recycling guide. You should have some stickers on your carts. You obviously need a good website. Most of that stuff, though, really is for that show me group, so that first 16% on the curve that I showed you that are just going to do it because it's the right thing to do. And then when you get into sample behavior change tools, there's a lot of different tools you can put in play that specifically get at overcoming the barriers. So the first one I'm going to talk about is cognitive dissonance. How many people remember that from their psychology class? You remember cognitive? Yeah. So the idea here is that people have what they believe and their values are not correlating to their actual behaviors. And with recycling, this is so true often. So pointing out to people that there's a gap, that their behavior is actually not following through with what they're doing is really, really important. This is actually a sign that was on the side of a transportation trucks that said more than half the garbage in this truck is recyclable. So Raleigh, and this is in a market where when we did the phone survey and asked people if they recycle, 94% of people said they recycled perfectly all the time. So pointing out that dichotomy. So incentives and rewards. If you can provide them an incentive to overcome the barrier, like in the case of the food waste kitchen counter or compostable bags, that's a great way to get them to try that behavior for the first time. Hopefully they're happy with it, and then the behavior can continue. Commitments and norms. So what the science says about this and the research is that if you commit to do something in writing, you are 50% more likely to follow through. So that's why, has everyone seen all the pledges that are out there today? It's like pledge happy, everyone's got a pledge. So to a certain extent, there's too many pledges, so be careful, don't just run out and do a pledge tomorrow. But there is a role for commitments, whether it be written's the strongest, verbal, and then online is third. And the research is very clear that if you can get someone to make that commitment, they are more likely to follow through with the behavior. So that's a really good tool to employ in your programs. And then next we have feedback. So, letting people know how they're doing, good or bad. There's lots of oops tags going on out there. There's not a lot of positive tags. This is a program, a waste management recycle often, recycle right program that was done in a market that is Spanish and English, so that's why there's so much text on there, because these are bilingual. But the idea was, if they're doing a good job, they were doing cart tagging. If they're doing a good job, give them a smiley face and pat them on the back, because you want to reinforce that good behavior. If they're doing a bad job, we showed the shocked face and then gave them some specific feedback on the tag. And a little side note here, we tested oops translated into Spanish. That doesn't work. So the reason we did emojis is that actually translated into both languages and worked universally across different cultures. So feedback is a really important tool in changing behaviors. And then lastly, we have social diffusion. And so in terms of social marketing, what this is one-on-one education and getting other people to send your message for you. So wherever you can, doing education at events and places where you can get people working together is a very, very powerful way to change behaviors. All right, so that's the end of mine. Just as an overview, key takeaways I would say is be careful about just like your standard education when you're doing recycling, and really hone in on exactly what behaviors you want to change, what are the barriers, how can you overcome them, and then get as close as you can to personal contact to work with people to change their behaviors. Thank you.
Wow, Julie Kohlauer. She's out of Seattle. She's a genius. If you're ever thinking about how to engage local anybody and anything and change their minds on something for any reason, hopefully for good, call Julie Kohlauer. Seriously, she's a genius. You're welcome. I just preached the gospel. All right, timer to keep me honest, and we'll go ahead and jump on in. All right. I can't stand up there, I'll go nuts. So I'm going to talk about more better recycling, and more better recycling basically is what everybody wants. They either want more material or they want their material that they're getting to be better quality. Chances are pretty good you want both. I work with the Recycling Partnership. We work toward that. Here's a list of our funders. It's growing every minute. That's probably not even up to date, and it was updated a week ago. Basically, we're a national nonprofit that works to get more better recycling. So we take private money and apply it to public recycling programs across the country through grants and technical assistance and tools to help them improve their supply and better engage their residents. That's the short of it. We're working nationally, growing all the time. Measures of our success, we've been all over the place. I won't sit here and talk about all these metrics. We work in a lot of communities, provided quite a bit of tools, provided a lot of CART grants in particular, and a lot of free resources available on our website. Everybody has free resources on their website. So we actually go and work in communities hand in hand to help people make the change they need. A lot of times folks have a desire, they just need help, a little bit of help, a little bit of a push, so we're there for them for that. This year we're really focusing on a few key things. First off, we did a big report in the last year looking at the state of curbside across the United States. It was a nice partnership with the EPA. You remember those guys? They were a thing for a while. But basically, one thing we found out was less than half of Americans automatically get curbside recycling service. And of those that do, they're not recovering about 60% of the packaging that they could. And so we look at that, and that just tells us there's a ton of opportunity. We look at half of a happy, there's a whole lot of opportunity because it sounds cute. But basically, the short of it is, there's a lot more that can be done. Recycling's been around for a while, but there's a lot of growth left. Second up, contamination rates. And a lot of you guys, Julie talked about it. A lot of you guys are probably experiencing this in some way in your programs. Contamination rates are on the rise. I have the number 20% up here because it used to be a freak out number. Oh man, 20% of our stuff is contaminated. Nowadays, you're not even surprised to walk into a single stream curbside recycling program and hear 20%. It's a problem. And there's not enough work being done on it, so we're doing quite a bit of work to solve that. Julie's done a lot of work as well. And in our research, one other piece that I feel like is kind of good news, in 100% of top performing programs that are out there, and in this case we define top performing programs as those getting at least 400 pounds per household per year. In 100% of those programs, there was some sort of public action to affect that good outcome. In other words, the people running the program were in some way engaged. Did that mean policy? Sometimes. Did it mean oversight of contracts and really engaging their recycling supply chain? Sometimes. It involved really great outreach campaigns and super good attention to customer service. Yeah, sometimes. But by and large, if you have good people on the ground, you can get good programs. And there's a lot of good people out there. So that's encouraging and helps the opportunity. Let's go through a couple more things. We like to look at operations plus education as sort of the highest principle. So if you provide really good operations for folks in local programs, and then you back it up with really good engagement, that's how you maximize your program. So first, just a few quick stats. So right now, for the average home, there's between 800 and 1,000 pounds of recyclables available. And so if you think about averages across the country in curbside programs, do you guys think that the average would be higher or lower than 500 pounds per household per year? It's like 1,000 pounds out there. You think lower? And if you paid attention to my numbers a minute ago, you'd know you were right. Right now, the average is about 357 pounds per household per year. You can kind of see the breakdown. Who's doing really well, who's doing kind of well. But again, there's a lot of opportunity out there. Folks are doing okay. They're working hard. They could be doing better. Next up, this will probably be pretty obvious, but if we have a curbside program, which container type wins out? So what do you think? We've got overall 357. We just talked about that. Do you think bins get more or less than that? This is going to be an easy one. Container. No. He said, I said bins get more or less. He said no. I don't want to go be right, but I think he's right. So he's right. Okay. They get less. I think no means less. So 271 for bins. How about bags? A bag program. More or less than 357. What do you think, lady with the camera? You think yes? Less. Yes, correct. Less again. This is going to be really easy, so I'm going to throw it to you, man. You ready?
For carts?
Carts.
So compared to what?
Compared to the other ones.
Overall?
Compared to the overall. Yeah.
Gotcha. I'd say they do more.
They get more. It's more. You think, right? You think blue shirt guys? Yeah. Blue shirt guys say yes. Carts get a lot more. Not brain surgery. It's easy. So a cart program's good. It's better than a bin program, which is better than a drop-off program. Next up, there's a lot of talk out there of, boy, you have to have people opt into your programs. Don't give everybody a cart. Some people aren't into it. If they call, then they're into it. So people say opt-in is better. So do you think with that 357 average, opt-in gets more or less across the community in terms of tons per household? Less. Yeah, way less. There's something called the default effect. Julie probably wrote about it at some point, but there's something called the default effect where people basically just don't take action for anything to speak of. And so if you make them call to get service, even if they're already paying for it, they're not going to call to get the service. So if you just give it to them automatically, you get more material. So that's, I don't know, that seems smart to me. So that's some operational stuff just to chew on. And Julie already hit on some communications BMPs. I'm going to hit on a couple more that seem relevant. And this is looking at not recycling communications, but looking at either behavior change marketing or just professional marketing in general. So super quick, how long do you think the average attention span is nowadays, Will?
20 seconds.
20 seconds. Anybody else have a guess? What do you think? Guy in the jacket. It's even lower than that. He said it was 8 seconds. He was right. That's not much time. And think about this. In 2005, that number was lower than that, or was higher than that. It was 12 seconds. So it's dropped that much from 12 seconds to 8 seconds since 2005. Why is that? Playing on a laptop? Because of laptops and cell phones and stuff. Yeah. Another little number that you might like to chew on. How many things can someone remember as a sequence? Julie talked about, you send out an average flyer, it's got like 100 things on it. And as a sequence, how many things can the average human remember? I'm going to say think about a phone number or something. How many was that? You said 7? You said 7. I heard her say 7. 4 sounds like 7. People can remember up to about 7 things, and that's if it's something simple like a phone number. So when you think about how we talk about recycling, we talk about all these things that are recyclable because we're at ISRI. We think about, grades of stuff that we're selling, and there's so many. We like to talk about all of them. But people can't remember that. So let's really quick have a little experiential learning. Super quick. So let's say we're trying to remember 7 things. Let's say they're animal names. Let's say I give you 8 seconds to remember it. This is the part where you got to pay attention for a minute. Even guy writing stuff down in yellow pad. So give it a shot. 8 seconds on the clock, 7 animal names. See if you can remember.
Fish, deer, cow, horse, dog, something, eagle.
Got 6 out of 7. That was only 8 seconds. That's pretty solid, I think. That's good. If I see you later, I might hear it.
Ah,
That
thanks.
was really good. One shot. Let's take it further, though. How many of us in communities around the country see things like, oh, the dirty dozen, or 10 in the bin? That sounds good. It rhymes. Like that. Like rhyming. So what about 12? 8 seconds on the clock. Anybody? Anybody name half of them? Even half of them. Even 3. Gecko. Gecko! Kangaroo. Crowdsourcing. Crane. Monkey. Elephant. One more. Come on. Give me that. Jackal. Yeah. Something creepy. Something sort of creepy about this list. They're complex words. And why is that important? Because we as professional recyclers use complex stuff. We think about how we sell stuff. Old corrugated cardboard or junk mail. Why don't we just say cardboard or boxes? Why do we have to say junk mail instead of just mail? The more complicated you make it, the harder it is to remember. And we're not talking professional recyclers, we're just talking regular people who really don't care that much about this stuff. Julie's 68% of folks who are just like, that's who we're talking to. They don't want to know all that. They don't need jackals and elephants. So we like no more than 5 for the recycling partnership. No more than 5. It's memorable, you take a glance at it, you're good. So let's test that for fun. And simple, super simple terms. I'm looking at you, so you've got to be ready.
Dog, cat, bird, horse, fish.
Nice. Guy in glasses nodding intelligently. Try again. Repetition aids memory. were telling me in the hallway earlier, Will, unprompted without seeing this presentation about visuals versus just words? You did. You were standing right over there outside the door. You said, boy, if somebody sees it instead of just reading it. Remember you said that? I'll pay attention to you. He's my neighbor. An image is worth 1,000 words. I'm a visual learner. Who's a visual learner? Anybody else? That guy is. Sorry, visual learner. You ready? I think everybody now can say dog, cat, bird, horse, fish. Because it's freaking simple. And that's the whole idea. So, when we're professional recyclers and we think about how to talk about things, we talk about things like this: hot cups and cold cups and crap bags and paperback books and shredded paper and bottles and jars and mugs and window glass and buckets and bulky plastics and EPS foam and good God. Horrible. So we would say at most, at the outside, lump things together in tiny piles, simple categories, and talk about them simply. 5 things. That's why that's relevant. What else is relevant? Instead of just talking about things simply in one town, what if we all fed into the same, what if we lived in different communities in the same state and we all fed into the same MRF? What are the chances these our communities talk to us about recycling in the same way? Even though they go to the same place, they could take the same stuff. We looked at, we were just doing a bunch of work in Ohio recently. So we looked at 42 communities that fed into a Rumpke. Rumpke provided beautiful, beautiful artwork. Said, here, use this stuff to educate your folks. Ready to go. We looked into it, just looking on their websites. Half of them didn't have any information on their websites at all. Municipal websites are hard, can't really damn, it's a pain to get stuff on a municipal website. Those that did, 40% of them didn't have the same stuff as Rumpke. They had all different stuff. And then 12% of them had the same stuff as Rumpke. So what we can say is out of 42 communities, only 12% really seem to understand the importance of universal communication, so that when you go to work and go home and go to bowling league and whatever else you do, you're seeing the same messaging across your region, which aids the repetition that Julie will tell you is really smart. So last up on these types of ideas, for something really important, don't even forget 5. Think about any advertising out there, any good professional ad you've ever seen. They just hit on one thing. You know, Anheuser-Busch doesn't say, buy every beer I make. Hey, buy Bud Light, look how refreshing it is. It's nice. You know, Coca-Cola doesn't say, buy every product I make, just buy just one. Oh, Dasani water, it's really nice. McDonald's, they have a giant value menu. They don't say, buy the value menu, they say, buy the Big Mac. Come on in, check this out. Look how juicy and delightful it is. You gotta come try it. It's a simple, achievable ask that gets you in the door. And every recycling program, every year, surely has one of those. They get one thing done. That's what they want to do. And if you focus on that, you can actually affect behavior. So focusing super hardcore. And can you remember one thing better than 5? Let's just say this is the most important thing. If I see you out tonight, I want you to remember this thing, and I will buy you a martini.
Strike redfish.
Well put. What's the one thing everybody knows, right? It's fish. Okay? You're going to remember that later when I finish rambling. You're going to say, yeah, man, fish. That's the whole idea. Whatever it is, fighting your top contaminant might be a really good example of that. Boy, I'm getting killed by tanglers or by plastic bags. Don't tell your residents, I'm getting killed by plastic bags and tanglers and this other thing and birthdays next week and buy a compost bin. Don't do that. They won't remember. Just tell them the one thing, the one important thing. I'm getting killed by plastic bags. Please handle them more responsibly. What was that? Okay. How do we apply this stuff? Super quick. How are we doing on time? Horribly. Fabulous. So if we put this all together, and there's lots more to consider, but if we put this all together with a tangible problem like I was just talking about, like fighting contamination, how might it go? First off, if we do that in an intelligent way, could it possibly work? Well, we tested that theory last year in Massachusetts, where we worked in a handful of communities and did a lot of testing on the ground, looking at tonnages before and after our engagements, looking at participation and opinions before and after engagements to see, can we affect behavior change and reduce contamination, and specifically reduce a targeted contaminant that's causing the system the most problems. And what we found was, in just one short engagement cycle, which was a few months. In our target communities, we reduced overall contamination by weight from 37% to 26%. You might say, man, that's horrible. There's no market in the world that wants 26% contamination. But relative to 37% over the course of 3 or 4 months, that's on the right track. That's good. And there's not a market in the world that wouldn't be really happy to see that kind of progress. So that was a win. Targeted contaminant, we went to every MRF that we were working with and said, if we get rid of one thing, what would it be? All of them, almost in unison, almost, dog, cat, bird, horse, fish unison. They said, plastic bags, stuff in plastic bags, kill us. It's heavy, we're having to pay to get rid of it, it's adding to our residual, it's worker safety, it's just a mess. So, direct messaging reduced that from 43% of all contaminants down to 15. We hit it hard, and it worked. So that's the short of it. So that's great. That's what happened. How did it happen? First off, we have a little model. We call it 311 because it sounds cute. But basically, there are 3 critical things. They probably line up fairly well with some of the stuff Julie was just talking about. They should. We talked to Julie about it when we were developing the model. But first, we would say, you can't just say no without making sure people know the basics of yes. So we try and do something to inform people of basics. Informational mailers, what we do, but regardless, making sure people are hip to really what you want so that they can act appropriately as they're being retrained. Then the workhorses of the program. First is personalized feedback. Julie said it, one-on-one interaction is important. Everybody thinks they recycle right. Even if they see that fantastic sign in King County saying, hey, half of this is going to recyclables, a lot of people are going to drive by that and say, that's great, people should do better, I'm better. They should be like me because I'm great. So you actually have to kind of grab people and shake them up a little bit. So an oops tag is a really easy way to do that. Picture you come home from work and there's this oops tag flopping from your cart. And you look at your neighbor and they don't have an oops tag flopping from their cart and it's red and it looks kind of dodgy and you're like, what did I do? This is me. Somebody looked at my, and then you open up the cart and you're like, they didn't collect my stuff. And it says on this tag, if I don't pull out that weird thing, that then they're never going to collect it. I have to deal with my mess and they have to reach in and kind of gross. Then it gets collected the next week. For the most part, that fixes the problem. For most people, one instance of that, it's done. And I've got lots of geeky data to back that up, but I won't go into it today because we just don't have the time. And then you back it up with a campaign around the same thing. Some of that general stuff that Julie talked about, just to be referential and remind people, yeah, this is serious. Everywhere you're local, we're going to hit you with this one thing. Which could be anything from mailers to billboards to social media to all that general stuff to reinforce the message. Beyond that, what are the other ones? Oh, this is drop off the same stuff. I won't go into it. Your website. Julie said, website's good for the people who are going to be engaged. It's a backup tool. It's good customer service in the modern age. It's not a have to do. That's why it's one of the ones. It's just a nice to have. It's real nice to have. To punctuate the point, up to about, really it's 25 to 60% of most communities, people go to the website first. That's where they're looking for information. They go to the website. Up to 60%, 25 to 60%, it depends on how tech savvy your community is. If you're a college town, closer to the 60. If you're a retirement village, you might actually be higher than you think. If you're something in between, maybe 25. But still, a lot of people and more all the time, that's where they're going. Most of them who are going there, about 70% are going using a mobile device like a phone. And most of those people, more than 50%, are going because they have a specific question about how do I handle this one thing. They actually have something in their hand, and they're at home, and they're like, I got to get this thing out of my house. They just cleaned up their closet, and they're like, what do I do with this? They grab their phone, they look it up. Okay, that's what I do with it, and otherwise it ends up as contamination or illegal dumping or something that we don't want. And so that's why websites are important. Not a have-to-have for behavior change, but it's smart just to help kind of head things off the path before they go funky. And then lastly, general advertising is good. I won't dwell on it. It doesn't change behavior. It serves as a reinforcer so that you have messages over the years as a piece of continuity across your community to help build a culture of recycling. So the last thing to say about contamination is it's not just communication with your residents. And here's one reason why. Weight alone doesn't tell the story. We measure contamination based on weight. Boy, your contamination rate's 30%. You're killing us with the MRF. What's your worst contaminants? Oh man, tanglers are killing me, like hoses and stuff, but hoses don't weigh anything. That's true, but if you get rid of those hoses, it's causing a lot of downtime, it's buggering up my equipment. Without that communication, I would just be thinking, what's the heaviest thing going to you? Can I reduce that? So I don't have to pay a fine, I don't have to call direct workers. So there's a lot beyond the resident, making sure that you're talking across your recycling supply chain, that there's an understanding between you and your hauler and your MRF on any issues all the time. So just a little point. We have free resources, super exciting stuff like this. The idea is it's not just somebody dropping a recycling container, dropping recyclable material into a container. It's more lifestyle religious because most decisions are made through emotion, not through fact-based thinking. 93, 94% of decisions are made that way. It's called limbic decision making, it doesn't matter. And so we try and appeal to people's emotions. So we have free resources like that. We have free resources like all the other stuff I just showed you on fighting contamination and engaging people. Just go to our website, recyclingpartnership.org. Click on whatever you want to do, fighting contamination, recycling with carts, boosting participation. Boosting participation. There's all kinds of great files, whether you're a designer or not. You can click on them, download stuff, fill it in, change it how you want, use it. It's all free, it's all ready for you, it's all pretty well thought out and good to go and proven. So last up, we just announced our latest grant round. It'll be a rolling grant round for cart recycling. So if you know a community or live in a community or work in a community that does not have curbside recycling carts, as long as your community is more than 5,000 households, and as long as they're ready to give carts to everyone in their community, check out the grant. It doesn't fund the whole cart. It's seed money. It's about 1/7 of the cost, along with an education kicker and free consulting. To help you kick it off right, we've done this with communities all over the country. We'll continue to do that. So please think about that. And okay, pretty close. That's it. Pretty close. Thanks, guys.
Good job, Bob. All right, thank you. Thank you, Jason. And as Jason's putting up the PowerPoint, my name is Bob Geddert. I recently joined RRS as a senior recycling consultant. Formerly, I was the department director for Austin, City of Austin Resource Recycling Department in Texas, and before that, the commercial recycling director in the city of Fresno, California. And so my perspective on this topic is municipalities, directing the fleets of municipalities and working with the public. And I have a tainted voice, I have a cold, and hopefully my voice will carry and stay through this presentation. I have a spring cold that I picked up about 3 days ago, so hopefully I can carry. So speaking from a curbside program, outreach, education perspective, from a municipal perspective, if you're not in the municipal world, if you're in a private sector world, you may interact with the municipalities, and you may have some takeaways from this conversation as well too. My talk is more on public messaging. And let's see. That way. Okay. So some basics. First of all, as we all know in this world, recycling is not dead, as has been proclaimed by some news articles in the past. And the municipal perspective, some of the topics that I wanted to talk about in this PowerPoint in a quick fashion, very quick bullet points. And of note, ISRI will have these PowerPoints on their website, so you'll be able to download these. The basics: public trust, financial transparency, local values, statistical persuasion, myth busting, and stakeholder engagement. Sounds like an odd mix for this topic, but all of this is interactive with the topic of public messaging, and I'll blend that together for you in a quick note. The basics, as you heard in some of the talk here from Jason, and in other conversations that you've heard in public messaging, the basics that I won't talk about except for on this slide is cart labeling, making sure you're using the images and being consistent and being simplistic in your messaging, bilingual and speaking the local language, targeting your messaging, simple 1 or 2 points and messaging, not complex, as you heard earlier, And neighborhood sweeps, avoiding the full city advertising, but getting down to the neighborhood, trying to get as close to the people as possible. When I talk public messaging and I speak to the city staff that have worked for me and to the city councils that I've reported to, public trust is something that you have to gain over time, and public messaging is directly related to that public trust. And in the public realm of providing service, pay as you throw is one way to pay for that service. It's a fee-based system, fee-based on wasting. It's a fairness structure. I won't get into the details of it, but my main point in gaining public trust through a fee-based structure is that the public encounters a fee system where they throw more trash out, they pay more. They throw less trash out and they recycle more, they pay less. That gains public trust. It's a form of public messaging. It's a way of gaining that trust, and they listen to you more. It's a way of gaining that trust. Color coding, and I'll get into that in a future slide. MRF tours, whether you're in the private sector or public sector, the way to teach the public where those recyclables go beyond the curb is to show them how the material is sorted, how it's baled, and it really teaches the citizens about contamination. That is how I drive home the message on contamination. I can't drive that home through messaging campaigns on the TV, the radio, and literature. Contamination is best taught at that MRF tour level there. And route structures are a way of communicating with the public too, and we often forget about that. When we design our routes, whether you're in private sector or public sector and you're servicing the public, you're impacting the public through your route structure. And you're driving through a school district, you're driving through an area of town that impacts the way the traffic is interacting with you. Your drivers are interacting with the public. And that route structure is a form of public messaging. Your trucks and the visibility of your trucks and the sides of your trucks and the color and the messaging on the sides of your trucks is a form of public messaging as well too. So just a point on color coding. And this is something that I've tried in the city of Fresno and as well as the city of Austin, is color coding the trucks and the carts to gain public trust. There was many national articles about recyclables being picked up and taken to the landfill. And all it took was one or two articles that spread through the AP wires. It might not have been your community, but it spread through, and people started to distrust the recycling systems that were developed throughout the nation. I would simply color code. In this case, we had toters. It could be any other type of cart or bag system. Brown for trash, blue for recycling, green for organics collection. The carts were colored that way, the trucks were painted that way. It does impact your routing as far as backup trucks and so forth, but in the end, I would tell the public, if you doubt whether your recyclables are going to a recycling facility or a landfill, follow that blue truck. And every single time, I gained the public's trust. It didn't take much effort for the public to really learn that, yes, their recyclables were being picked up by the blue truck and going to the recycling MRF. And I would offer that MRF tour to that citizen that had that doubt as well, too. It also gained the trust of our drivers, too, and eliminated some cross-contamination by our drivers. There often is that temptation of a driver helping out, a recycling driver helping out his friend who's driving a trash route by picking up the tail end of his trash route. You can eliminate that cross-contamination through color coding as well, too. Financial transparency. I won't get into the greater details of this, but part of this is building the trust of City Council and therefore building the trust of the citizens of that community. And that builds the trust through your public messaging. Your messaging as you deal with the general public is always based on the financial trust of the that the public has in you. Are you wasting city dollars in the management of your program? And so the financial transparency of being truthful to the public in working with the city council, full cost accounting, new program cost assessment, how much does it cost per household, per month for this new program? I would be very transparent. I'm building a new household hazardous waste program. It's costing 56 cents per month per household, and this is how it's being assessed. And I need this vote from City Council, and this is in the newspaper, and this is how the program's going to be managed. And the cost impact is not millions of dollars as it's described. It's cost impact on the utility bill and how it's assessed to the citizens and how the program's being managed. That builds the trust of the public, and the public will not believe your messaging on how to recycle or where to put their household hazardous waste unless they gain confidence that you're utilizing their public dollars appropriately. So financial transparency is very much part of that public messaging that's required. And just as an example, I won't run these numbers, but this is City of Austin recent numbers. And this is often published to the citizens. This is how much it costs to run your recycling program per month, per household, so that you know. And if you have a complaint about the cost of the program, come to me and I'll talk to you about it. Local values. Each community needs to build their programming based on local values to gain that public trust, to gain that public messaging on how to use the program. And so if it is, and I don't believe that politics and the dichotomy of politics affects my program, but I do believe that the flavor of that community affects how I communicate to that community. So it may be a community based on conservative values. I speak conservative values about recycling. My grandparents recycled. That's a conservative farmer's values, that as my grandfather was a farmer. If it's a liberal community, similar to Austin, Texas, where I recently came from, I spoke on environmental platforms of why we recycle. So we speak in terms of the local values, not in politics, but of local values. And sometimes that may involve different terminology in different communities. And statistical persuasion. Some people are numbers people, some people are visual, some people have different platforms of understanding. And so I'm very aware that some people like spreadsheets and some people really want to see the stats of how a program is working. And so we build that onto our website. And how do we count progress? You know, and what goes into those numbers in counting progress? And you know, one of the things that was extremely successful in the city of Austin just recently was a waste characterization study. Why? Because we studied what was going to the landfill. We studied what characteristics and what types of material was heading to the landfill, and we found 44% was recyclable in today's program, 46% was compostable. So that's 90% in today's technology, today's collection program, no changes to the program, could, if it was put into the right container, and 10% could to the landfill. So that proved to the citizens that we could reach a 90% diversion goal. That changed the conversation. Is 90% diversion attainable? That changed the conversation from that question of whether it's attainable or not to why are we sending that to the landfill? So you know, sometimes statistical persuasion is important there. And there's some background behind that study right there. And more statistics, another way to display those statistics in terms of tons. And mentioned earlier was not believing the assumptions, myth busting, trying to avoid the assumptions and getting into the facts and diving into what your community is actually believing in, studying the beliefs of your community, and I actually like doing a neighborhood survey, and I like clicking the neighborhood and finding out whether that neighborhood is actually participating, what is the participation rate of that neighborhood compared to income levels. There's often the assumption that poor neighborhoods do not recycle. I find the opposite happening, that often poor neighborhoods do recycle to a great degree, and I found that in Austin. We challenge those assumptions, and I find that in all the cities that I've worked in, it's not based on income, it's often based on education of the program, that's an awareness of the program and knowledge of what's recyclable and what isn't. It's often not linked to an income level. So we often make assumptions that income levels are related to participation when that's a false assumption. There are other assumptions we make too, and I challenge those assumptions. I like to study the weak participation areas. I chopped up Austin into 26 different study areas and looked at the participation areas of the city and found about 9 weak areas of the city, and we just concentrated our outreach in those neighborhoods, sent college students out knocking on the doors and having that direct contact, and sometimes that's what's needed in public participation. Stakeholder engagement and the whole concept of stakeholder engagement. I challenge the traditional definition, the distance that we may have as we define stakeholders. It's an umbrella term. Stakeholders are in it for the long run. We engage with stakeholders from the beginning, middle, and long term. Stakeholders are not just in the beginning design of a program. And engagement with those stakeholders requires listening to stakeholders. Often in municipalities, we get into these stakeholder meetings and we like to tell the citizens what we want to do. And a stakeholder engagement meeting is intended to listen and see what they want, you know? So an effective stakeholder engagement is intended to create a high-quality decision-making process. Say you want to create a new collection program. The city of Austin, in the last 2 years, decided that it wanted to engage in food waste collection. Found a lot in the trash, a lot going to the landfill. About 24% of what's going to the landfill is food waste. How can we collect that food waste? Went to the stakeholders, went to the citizens, went to the business community, went to the restaurants. How can we collect that food waste? Engaging in high-quality decision-making, increased effectiveness of service delivery was very much part of that discussion from the citizens. We were focused on how can those citizens put their food waste in a different container. Those citizens were focused on how can we deliver better service to them. Different approaches there, and we were listening. And improved risk management practices resulted from that. We learned a bit from those discussions, and upfront policy decisions from City Council resulted in that. It was about an 18-month process before City Council approved the new program. So my best practices, this concludes my talk, winding down. Do those basics in public education. Build that public trust, that public messaging and public outreach and public education has limited effect if you don't build that public trust. Display that financial transparency to help build that public trust. Build programs on local values. You'll misfire with the local community if you're not working with their local values. Utilize statistical persuasion. Many of your population builds on numerical values. Not everybody, but some. And bust those myths and those assumptions. Don't build your programs on assumptions. and believe in a stakeholder engagement that's not only at the beginning, but engage those citizens in the continual process. And I'll finish with an example. In the city of Fresno, I worked very closely with the chairman of the board of the local business association, Downtown Business Association in Fresno, the city of Fresno, California, and no particular purpose except to be close and hear his vision on how he was building the downtown area of Fresno from his perspective. And as I was building a residential community and services for the residential community, he came to the city council meeting and said, this is what I would like to see in residential services. And he supported my vision for residential services. He was reaching out beyond his normal realm, but it was because of the built-up trust between us as I was building that relationship, that stakeholder relationship between his work and my work. And that can happen in any community as you build that trust relationship. And I believe that public messaging starts with that stakeholder engagement. And that concludes. I'm ready for questions.
I have a couple questions for Jason. That's me. Jason, does the size or color of a cart matter?
We did look into the size of the carts, and looking at, and we also looked at collection frequency as well. We really thought weekly versus bi-weekly there'd be a big difference, and we thought there might be a big difference between 6 feet 4 and 9 feet out. In the end, those weren't big differences. They weren't really a big consideration, shockingly small from our research. And the color, I'll be honest with you, that wasn't part of our research. Some lovely research from Keep America Beautiful, so we can go to nod to them that most Americans associate blue with recycling carts, but then again, or with recycling, and so choosing blue seems to already resonate with people. But I think largely to Bob's point, being consistent across your community or region is maybe arguably more important.
Yes.
And look no further than Denver, who uses a purple recycling cart, and they swear when they poll their citizens have pride in being slightly different, but it's still a recognizable color, and they use it across the whole community in all their recycling efforts. If it's recycling, it's purple in Denver. So generally speaking, if you're going to buy a cart, just make sure it's differentiated from the garbage. Ideally, hot stamp the side of it with recycling, and that's the symbol, so that people, regardless of their language, regardless of their culture, regardless of where they come from, they understand this is my recycling cart.
And to be consistent.
Does that help?
It helps. The follow-up is, you said the pounds are going down on average per household. Why do you think that is?
Oh, you need this? All right. For the video. Though I think we know pounds have been dropping, that wasn't part of my thing. It was, my thing was just showing there's more opportunity out there, which is, I mean, I think it's fairly obvious. We're just under recovering material, and to Julie's point about looking in the trash, to Bob's point about looking in the trash, getting into your statistics, it doesn't have to be particularly complex. It doesn't have to be particularly expensive to take a look at your waste comp. We do it at the household level, just across some representative routes, looking at twin garbage and recycling carts and doing what we call capture rate studies. But I think we could all point to reasons why some of the rates are dropping. And frankly, that's why we look at capture rates. That's a reason why we look at capture rates more as a better metric for programmatic health, rather than, say, a recovery rate across an entire waste stream. If I'm assessing, say, a curbside program or a commercial program, or pick it, doesn't really matter, trying to assess that program health against the entire waste stream is sort of silly because there's so many variables there. So the better thing to do really is to look at, if I want to assess curbside recycling, if I just look at the curbside recyclables versus what's going in the curbside trash over time, that should give me a better measure of what I'm capturing and how I'm doing. I mean, yeah, we know lightweighting is going to be a challenge. And the changing waste stream is going to be a challenge, and it's getting complicated, to Julie's point earlier. And so those are some things that they're realities that we just need to be in front of.
Julie, for Jason's look snags, what kind of frequency do we need to perform them? You're not gonna do it every week.
No,
Once a month, is it once a year, is it once a lifetime?
I think it has more to do with, sort of how long you do it. So ideally, you would roll out an OOPS program, and probably the minimum that you do it is about 3 months. I don't know what you guys are finding. Yeah, and then you look at your results, and you may need to go back and do another wave. Because the other thing is behaviors, you can change them, but you want them to persist. So going back and doing reminders, but maybe you don't have to do as much when you follow up in a year or in 9 months after you do the first thing. But when you're going to do tagging, we typically say, 3 months is about what you need to do to really get started. And that might not mean you look at every cart every week, but you're looking in, you take your community, you're splitting it into 4, every cart gets looked in once a month for 3 months, something like that.
Just to build on that super quick, Will, and then throw in, if you don't mind, is that all right if I could jump in on the back end of
I
that?
think you're going to anyway.
That's right. I'm saying, that's my southern politeness to say it's all right. It's actually to say, shut up, Will.
Stand up.
No, that doesn't work for you. So we do it, it really depends on whether collection is weekly or bi-weekly. We look at 8 collection cycles as being about right. At that point, our rate of tagging has dropped and maintained a new normal for a bit, and we have some pretty geeked out data on that. So about 8 collection cycles. So if you're weekly, that's only obviously 2 months, and if you're bi-weekly, it's more like 4 months. So Julie hit it in the middle with 3. But the trick of it is, it can be fairly daunting to say, my whole community has a contamination problem, so I have to go address my whole community by walking every street, tipping every lid, and looking after these target contaminants. So it's really an 80-20 rule for the most part, where 20% of the routes are really causing 80% of the problem, and it's not hard to identify them. Your MRF will know, your drivers will know. So identify the worst routes, start there, 8 collection cycles, tipping every lid. It's intensive. And then you back off from there. The ideal thing at that point is to empower the drivers, because they're touching every cart anyways, with just some minimum tagging. Tag 3 to 5 carts per collection day. There's always going to be somebody buggering things up a little. So just a little bit of light touch maintenance so you don't have too much backsliding too quickly. And that's a little less daunting. 20% of your community, 8 collection cycles, and then empower the drivers and assess again 6 months later.
Was that your little add-on, or was that on the presentation?
Oh, we can keep going.
My question is, have you got any documentation on before and after rates, and apply that to the cost of the residual and the cost of the added maintenance of the MRF to build a justification for the cost that's invested in doing the program?
And the short answer is that's a work in progress. We've got the before and after rates. We're working with our recycling partnerships, working with our MRF working group right now. They represent about 76% of the processing capacity in the country, trying to get to those numbers. It's a more complicated question than you'd think, but it's an important one to some of Bob's points earlier about fiscal transparency. So we're working toward it.
If we're going to do this on a broad base, we're going to have to be able to justify it.
Right, and I think.
Go ahead, and then I'll follow.
Okay. And I know waste management is also sort of looking at the cost effectiveness piece of it. And I think the unanswered piece, because many of these tagging programs are fairly new, is this persistence. So your cost benefit's going to come in if truly you can get that behavior to persist without too much expensive follow-up or too often follow-up. And I think that's the big part. So how much will behaviors degrade over time once you stop your tagging? And that's the piece I don't think we have answered yet.
Persistence is a good word we use today.
You used that word. I remember that. You used three words, 2 P's and an E.
And I have 2 responses, one directly to Will on the cost issue. In the city of Austin, for cost-benefit analysis on the program, what we did was we hired 6 part-time interns to walk the streets and do tagging, and there was no fines assessed. It was the polite tagging, but we also used those same walkers to do cart inventory, and we found, because they have a pay-as-you-throw, 4 cart sizes, and we found that the cart inventory paid for the program. We did adjustments on the rates based on the cart inventory. That paid for the 4 staff. So as the contamination was adjusted perhaps about 2% downward in the first year, There is a cost savings there, but the program itself was paid for through the inventory adjustment. Now, another example from my experience in the city of Fresno, we had 6 staff working full-time, and the city council authorized the staff. We had the tag system, there was no fines, 6 months check-in with the city council, no reduction in contamination. We were at about 24% contamination, and city council, the mayor was pretty upset about that, and he wanted a $25 fine on the second offense, which required some accounting as we were tagging. You know, we had to we didn't have an RFID tag system, but we did do a fairly elaborate documentation of first offense, second offense, third offense. First offense was a freebie, second was $25, third was $50, fourth was $75, and that was established by city council. The very first economic fine issued, and this is a true story, was against the mayor. And we did not target him. And the mayor stood up in front of city council and said, I goofed, it was my second offense, I pay the fine right here in front of me, and I believe in this system. And in the first year of assessing the fines, we collected approximately $10,000 in fines. The contamination rate was halved from 25% to about 12.5%. And Sunset Recycling was the MRF operator, private MRF operator. And I could probably track down some economics for you on that.
I have one more for you, Bob. You said that 746 was your cost of recycling.
Yes.
Net cost. How much of that was MRF? And how much of that was collection?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure of the percentage. The question was how much of that 747, that cost 747 is the cost per household per month for recycling, and that was full cost accounting of the city collection and MRF delivery to a private MRF, and including tipping fee. I'm not sure of the percentage, but I can get that chart to you.
I'm interested because you had one of the highest processing fees.
It's a processing fee netted.
$84 a ton or whatever.
Yeah, it's a pretty high processing fee, but it's offset by some profit sharing, and it varies from year to year.
Yeah.
The interesting enough, even at a high processing fee, the recycling costs less than trash because recycling's picked up every other week and trash is picked up weekly. So that holds that cost down.
Last question?
Got a few more minutes if you'd like them.
Do you take into account with the fiscal transparency, do you take into account commodity markets? You know, it's so after the merger. I mean,
Yes.
you know, selling this to a paper mill, those are always going to fluctuate.
Yes.
You know, so in a good economy, it's going to be great. In a bad economy, if there's any kind of residual glass shards or anything in those paper bales that are coming out of those MRFs, those bales are going to get rejected by paper mills. So it in effect costs even more. So do you add those two?
It shows up, but not as direct as you might know. The question was fiscal transparency in my city accounting to city council regarding contamination, glass shards in the bales and so forth. Where it shows up is in the processing cost. So I am charged back as a city, we are charged back on processing cost. And that processing cost does show up in the city accounting. That is displayed on a monthly basis to city council. There is a processing cost plus a rebate on market value, and it's netted out. And there's a monthly chart that's displayed to city council. It does create the question to citizens, why are you not making money off your recycling program? And we are constantly answering that question. I think it's a very valid question that constantly teaches the citizens, we're not going to make money off of recycling. We're simply doing recycling for other reasons, and here's the other reasons. And by the way, the net cost to your recycling is cheaper than landfilling. Now, I'll run out of that question someday when recycling processing costs more than landfilling, but that day has not come yet. That day of reckoning hasn't come. But that,
I mean, that's specific to single stream.
yes, that's, and
Source separated where it's clean commodities.
I think to get to the heart of your question, it's buried within the chargeback from the private MRF operator to the city. And I could dig for those numbers, but it's not as transparent. It's buried in the processing fee, and it's adjusted every 5 years.
I'm not asking for the numbers.
Yeah,
Specific
yeah.
numbers. I'm just wondering if that's taken into
It's taken into account, but not transparent to the citizens. That it's the overall net number that's given to the citizens. Yeah.
Tell you what, it looks like clock on the wall says quarter till, and I know at least one person who's sitting over here, has a flight in about an hour 20.
Ooh.
So we should probably call it. If you guys have any other questions, I think engage Bob or I throughout the night. Engage Julie by phone or email, or hop a Uber with her to the airport. I'm sure she'll talk to you then. But thanks for coming in, really appreciate it.